All right, guys, we are back for the second half of today's lecture on, what is it on? Like land use and urban growth. All right, so we're number 24. This is kind of where we ended with 23. But noise pollution is another disadvantage that you're going to see in urban areas. You don't think of pollution usually as being noise, unless you walk in my room during lunch. Just kidding. But it's... sounds can be harmful, and it can be harmful to humans, and it can be harmful to wildlife as well. So there's a scale on the next slide that we're going to look at. Okay? What does it ask? Probably just what I wrote there. And then back to number 23, can you please add light pollution and urban heat island? So in general, cities are warmer and rainier and cloudier and foggier than their rural surroundings. So for urban heat island, what you should know is that these dark roofs and this blacktop, like think about like Brookfield East parking lot, absorbs heat. There's also heat generated by cars, like combustion engines, correct? And so you get this increased heat in urban areas. In terms of light pollution, you know exactly what I'm talking about if you've ever looked up at the stars in this area versus like Door County or the UP or somewhere where there's not a lot of light pollution. So you've got this artificial light created by cities that threatens wildlife. Think about like sea turtles that lay their eggs on the beach at night. They require darkness or their bodies won't do it. So please make sure you have this added to your T-chart that you made for number 23 on advantages and disadvantages of urbanization. Where's my pen? All right. So damaging, kind of look at right here, like a lawnmower. After 8 hours of exposure becomes damaging, and then go from there. Think about how loud your AirPods are, people. Like there's definitely some people that can't hear me when I talk to them. Right around here, right around 120 is where it starts to be painful. All right, so think about that. All right, look at number 25. Let's talk socioeconomic difficulty in urban areas, specifically in less developed countries. Go back. So slum by definition is this poor housing, lots of people living in a single room. A squatter settlement, or I've heard shantytown more often, is when you take like cardboard boxes and sheet metal and you go on an owner's land. So you trespass on private land and you squat. It's illegal. You occupy this land without the owner's permission. Some governments in different countries regularly bulldoze squatter shacks and send the police to drive illegal settlers out. People usually leave and then they come back in a couple days or a couple weeks. So in both of them, we lack running water, so we lack sanitation. There's a lot of pollution. There's no trash systems to take care of the solid waste. And so as you can imagine, the health conditions are pretty poor. So what you see here is a shantytown in Mumbai in India. You see a lot of like tarps. You see some sheet metal over here. Look at all the solid waste along these train tracks. And look at the urban development in the background. So you've got this area of relative wealth followed by this area of really low wealth very close to it. So when you look at how cities grow, we've kind of got two options. We go up or we go out. In the US, we go out. In Asia, a lot of times, we go up. Those are compact cities. They kind of just get big and tall. They depend on mass transit. They depend on a lot of walking. Okay, so Hong Kong is a great example of that, as is Tokyo. Remember how big that city is in a small area. Dispersed cities are exactly what they sound like. They spread out. We depend on cars. Think about Los Angeles and how spread out it is. And if you've ever tried to drive there and there are 7 lanes of traffic and how long it takes. So this is what the West has done mostly. There's Hong Kong. Look how vertical everything is. Anybody recognize that one? That one's Milwaukee. Okay. So when you look at these dispersed cities, we're pretty dependent on automobiles. And so when you look at urbanization, we've got this dependence on automobiles that we should talk about. So let's talk about reducing automobile use. So yesterday, we talked about full cost pricing. This is number 27. Full cost pricing can help reduce automobile dependence, raising gas prices, charging the tax to cover the harmful costs of driving. In order to do that, we've got to talk to the consumers, so it's not just the idea that we're raising taxes. We've got to use that money to encourage mass transit, and then what we do is we lower income taxes or sales tax to offset that. We don't just raise taxes. Let me repeat, you don't just raise taxes. You don't want the average person to be affected a great deal. So other options for number 27, you raise parking fees. If you've ever driven through Illinois, you know that we have tolls on roads. You charge a fee to drive in and a fee to drive out. Singapore does this. You have kind of like an iPass. You have these cars with electric sensors, and when you enter, you get charged into this major city, and then they use that money for their mass transit. And then you have this car sharing. You have short-term car rental, kind of like those. Are they called like bubble bikes or something like that, where you can rent the bike? This is some advertising. I don't even know where this is. I didn't write it down. Shanghai, China, which is a super populated area, charges $9,000 for a license plate. I'm not saying that's the way to go, but it is effective in discouraging automobile use. Okay, here's a picture of Los Angeles. Traffic. Actually, there's not that much traffic there right now if you really look at it. And so what are some alternatives? What number is this? This is an introduction to the big table, so I'm going to go quickly. So in Portland and in Madison, we've got a lot of bicycle encouragement. In Portland itself, 8% commute on their bikes. There's bike sharing. There's a lot of bikeways. Madison also has a lot of like bike trails. You've got heavy rail systems like subways and like the L in Chicago. You've got light rail in Portland, like streetcars and trolleys, and like downtown Milwaukee. Not very many people use it. You've got buses. Bus rapid transit is what BRT stands for. And then you've got like these high-speed bullet trains, which are pretty popular in Asia, between the big cities. There's talk about it in the U.S., but so far, no go. And so when you talk about transportation priorities, they go from top to bottom in terms of environmentally friendly. This is where most of us are, including me. So as we move to the big table, can you please write 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages for each? I'll circle the ones I like. You do whatever you want. All right, so bike trade-offs. Bike trade-offs. One advantage is they are quiet and they don't pollute. They also don't take many resources to make. That frame is made of aluminum. It's not that big. They don't burn fossil fuels. They don't require much parking. The disadvantages, you get screwed if you get caught in the rain or snow. You also get screwed if you get hit. All right, so again, 2 per row. Buses, or BRT, Bus Rapid Transit System. They're going to be relatively cheap compared to something like a subway. I'm going to add another one that I wrote down. Bus lanes, which other vehicles can't use. So in high traffic times, this is a efficient way of getting around. Which other vehicles can't use? Disadvantages is they can lose money because they can't charge that much, and they get stuck. They get caught in traffic. Our mass transit rail within urban areas. The tracks can go underground. Is that in here? Yep, because they can use less land. So they can go underground, they can use less land, and they're a lot safer than automobiles. Automobiles aren't the safest things out there. They're expensive. They require lots of laws to be passed to fund them. And they only really work in densely populated areas. Like you couldn't have a subway in Brookfield. It wouldn't work. So, excuse me. So then how about these like high-speed bullet trains? Less air pollution than the typical. So if you were taking like a short plane trip from Milwaukee to Minneapolis, the bullet train in Asia would be about the same distance that you could take. And more energy efficient as well, which kind of goes together. They're expensive. And I'm going to do this one, the collision at car crossings. Makes me think of that train in Elm Grove from a few years ago. So 29 then, as we plan, things are going to look different depending on what our priorities are. So this is land use planning. Land use planning is when you look at the best present and future uses of whatever the land is. You want to encourage people to come, and you want to encourage the idea of money to be made. And so what jurisdiction does is they zone. I'm sure you've heard of this. It's zoned for commercial use. It's zoned for residential use. It's mixed use zoning. So they designate what land can be used for what. Okay, once a land use plan is developed. It asks for limitations for number 30. The developers, based on their, their priorities, can influence and modify decisions that aren't very good for the environment. Oftentimes it favors the commercial so that economics can grow. And if it's strictly zoned, we can't really, be creative. And so this mixed use zoning is kind of what's encouraged. Circle 31. 31's on your own. So how do we preserve open space? This is 32. We're going to try to go fast so I can fit this in my 15 minutes that YouTube will allow. So we've got urban growth boundaries. We've got places that the urbanization can be stopped. You see Portland in the top right. You see in the left the urbanization, and then this boundary that can be stopped. You see big parks like Central Park, which is on a picture on the next page, in New York. And you see green belts. This is Toronto. When we drove into Toronto on our family vacation, we saw this driving in, surrounding the city. Here's Central Park. And so what's an eco-city? Number 33. An eco-city is this mixed use. We've got walking and biking and mass transit. We've got high recycling and reusing. You see a green roof there in Chicago. Chicago actually has a rule that if you build a building with a flat roof, it has to be green now. It decreases CO2, it helps urban heat islands, and it helps preserve biodiversity. So those are the eco-cities. That's number 33. 34 looks at types of housing as well. And so you kind of see the typical in the middle here, the typical housing development. Cluster developing looks at kind of this common area. So cluster housing, I'm going to define. High density housing units are concentrated in a small portion of a parcel, with the remainder being used for shared open space. So you keep this green space, you decrease the size of people's yards, and you have this common area for people to share. Okay, and so when you talk about new urbanism, which is kind of like the idea of an eco-city, you've got these ideas. The cities are walkable, they're bike friendly. This is number 35. They're mixed use in terms of zoning. They're environmentally sustainable, and they have this mass transit. There's a couple videos here. One of them's on Brazil. You know what? Cross out number 36. Cross out number 36. It's an example of how a city in Brazil, Curitiba, followed this new urbanism video. And this picture is in Middleton, Wisconsin, which is one of these planned cities like that. So that is it. Tomorrow we'll review. Thursday is your test. Message me with questions. Have a lovely day. I hope you were good for the sub.